Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey there. Hey, Benji.
Hey, folks. How's it going?
Good.
Well, we are expecting 12 people and there are 12 participants. I wonder if they all match up.
You know what? I just realized I forgot to add myself to the agenda, so I will do that now, but that means there's probably going to be 13.
There are now 13. Hey. Right. Well, it seems like the majority of us are here. So I'll get us started. Lee can't make it today, so he's asked me to host this meeting. So just want to point out that by being here, we have all already agreed to the specification membership agreement, the participation guidelines, the contribution guide, and the code of conduct. Links to all of these can be found in the agenda file for anyone who's watching on YouTube and wants to join us in a future meeting. Let's first introduce all of the attendees. So we'll go through this in the order that it is in the agenda, starting with myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Benji.
I think I'm on there second. I'm Alex. Hey.
Oh, we don't have any Andreas, I guess, so I'm next. Or do we have Andreas? So hello, everyone. My name is Martin. I'm doing Android at Apple. And I nominate Itamar.
Yeah, I am Itamar. I work on infra at Meta.
Hi, I'm Ryan. I work with Itamar also on infra at Meta.
I think Tianyu is not here today, but I'm Jordan. I work on Relay at Meta. And I think Monica is also not here yet, perhaps. So we can go to Ernie.
Yeah, hey, I'm Ernie. I work on kind of DevX and data layer stuff at Coinbase.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kuei. I work on product quality at Meta. Matt?
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm also furiously merging a few last minute PRs for other attendees. But yeah, I'm also at Meta.
Hi, my name is Young and I work at the trade desk.
Hey, it's Derek here from Apollo.
Rob from First Dibs.
Okay, I'm not sure if we caught everyone, but hopefully that's it. Wave or shout out if you haven't already said hi.
Calvin? Is Calvin here?
Yeah, I'm here. I think it's a last minute PR that looks like it has a conflict, which I will fix. But yeah, I'm Calvin. I'm with Apollo and in Vancouver.
And I'm Anthony. I'm also with Apollo in Las Vegas, Nevada. I just put my PR in for the agenda.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you all. What a healthy attendance today. Fantastic. Okay, so first of all, since I'm hosting the meeting, it would be particularly helpful if someone else were to head up taking notes today. Do we have any volunteers for that? It's generally helpful to have like 2 or 3 people helping.
I can try.
Thank
I
you,
can
Young.
also try.
Thank you, Kuei. Appreciate that. Thank you so much. And also everyone else, you can chip in on the notes as well. We've got this one live document, so you can just contribute. It's particularly useful when Young or Kue are talking for other people to continue to take notes during that time. We should review the prior meetings, but I have a feeling that August was a busy time for us all. It looks like the APAC meeting didn't go ahead, and the same probably for the EU meeting. So I don't think there's actually anything to recap. So we'll move on. We have reviewed the previous meeting's action items, which would be fun. I wonder if I actually filed them. So that would be the first question. Where's our projects? There we go. I don't see any. There might not have been any. If we look at the ones ready for review, though, there's two. One as a reminder to go through all your old action items, and we'll be closing them soon. So if they're still relevant, please comment on them to say so. If they're not relevant, please comment on them to say so. And there is also one from me that says that it's ready for review. Clarify the selection set in the example is a selection set and not a document. Oh yeah, this is me again proposing that we close one of the pull requests or address it with an alternative pull request. So if anyone's able to review that, number 1335, that would be good. It would be good to close that one out one way or the other. So place your opinions. We won't go through that now. So let's go ahead and review the agenda. It looks like we will be looking at explicit block string definitions, then talking about the full schemas proposal from Martin, relay error handling from Itamar, and then talking about changing the execute selection set to execute grouped field set, which is something that Yakov has proposed previously, and I have an alternative proposal. I don't think Yakov is with us today. And finally, onto the client-controlled nullability updates. So let's get it started. I guess I'll kick us off with the first one, which is the explicit block string definition. This one is GraphQL spec pull request 1042. It's an incredibly simple pull request. Basically, we don't define a key or an entity in the grammar for a block string. Instead, it's just one of the definitions of a string. And yet somewhere in the spec, we refer to block string. So it's not defined. So all I've done is expanded the grammar to include a definition for block string. So I've just taken its inline definition and just moved it to a top level thing. And that's really all there is to it. So some reviews on that would be nice. If anyone's got any feedback or hesitations on this, now would be a good time to raise them. All right, general thumbs up. That's it. Just wanted to bring it to your attention. If anyone wants to actually comment on the pull request or even just approve the pull request, that would be appreciated. But let's move on to Martin's topic, which is full schemas. Martin.
Yes, thank you, Benji. So this is a follow-up from last working group meeting about full schema. So this time I made a few slides, which I wanted to share with you. Just to give a little overview of the problem it's trying to solve. So I'm working on Apollo Kotlin, which is the Apollo client for Android. And we tell all our users we support 3 different types of files. We support operations, of course, and for schemas, we support, historically, we've been supporting JSON schema for introspection schema. And since, I don't know, 1 or 2 years, we encourage people to use SDL schemas just because it reads easier, it's easier to modify, it's also a lot more concise. and easier to work with in the first place. The problem when they do so is that sometimes they bump into this kind of errors, like if they have built-in type definitions inside the SDL, they get errors. Here it's from the IntelliJ plugin, like the GraphQL IntelliJ plugin. They do autocomplete and all this kind of fun stuff with SDL. But they do not like it when you redefine the existing type definitions. And this is expected because the spec actually has some language that the scalar definition must not be there, or they must be omitted. For directives, there is language that says they may be omitted, but they may be not. And there's nothing about introspection types. The problem is for us to validate completely an operation, we actually need those built-in definitions. We need to know, and this goes in the weeds of future discovery that Jung might talk about it a bit later, maybe. We need to know what the server supports. So a simple example is there is no input value, the deprecation reason. If we want to validate that, we need the built-in definitions. So there is some kind of like conflict between what the spec says and what the client needs. So this is why I'm suggesting we introduce the full schemas. So full schema is like a schema, but instead of being consumed by an implementation, it's consumed by another tooling, like maybe it's an IDE plugin, or maybe it's a client like Apollo Kotlin. So it takes the regular schema, didn't find a better name for it, and it adds the built-in definitions on top of it. To make this process a bit easier, I'm also suggesting we use and we add a new appendix to the spec, which contains all the built-in definitions. They are a little bit present today, but they're a bit scattered and sometimes not matching 100% between the implementations. So to conclude this presentation, I have 3 questions, and these are like broad questions, open questions. We might not be able to answer everything today, but I'd like to get a general show of hand today. And also what I'm going to try to do next is shut down this proposal into smaller ones, like things we can merge incrementally. Like Appendix C, for an example, this is something that does not change any validation rule, does not change any behavior. So maybe we can move forward with this. Maybe there is something about SDL definitions. This is my point number 2 here. Like from last working group meeting, we had questions around if something is in the SDL, it must be used. And I've been doing some research there and didn't find anything like this in the spec. So maybe that's something we want to introduce in the spec, and we can make that a sub problem and look into that.
What do you mean?
Yeah, sorry.
What do you mean by used?
So I think the point last time was if you have the introspection definitions, like for an example, you have the schema type definition. And you have no field that uses it, then it was considered some error. Maybe this one is actually no, this one is a good one, because when you type your query in SDL, you type type query, open brace, and then you never add the __ schema field. And if after that you would start adding the schema type, then it feels a bit weird. And I think Ivan was mentioning that until now, we did not want to do that. But maybe someone has more context here. I don't know, I'm catching up on this. But if this is something that we want to avoid, it feels like we should add this to the spec. My personal feeling there is, for question one, I would say introducing two concepts might be a bit too much, because it creates two completely different worlds, and we might not need to have these two different worlds. I would actually prefer to just leave the interpretation open. So if you add some scalar types to your SDL, maybe some implementation can decide that they recognize this scalar type and they can add support for them. And that would open the door to stuff like maybe we want some implementation that doesn't use floats. I don't know, just saying something random here. But it's a lot more flexible. It's also less work for us on the working group, because it just means less language in the spec. We just define a bunch of minimal validation rules for SDL, and if we're happy with them, then it's up to client tools and server tools to interpret them. So that would be my, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if this is an example that kind of, so one example I was thinking about was integer definition, where I think we specifically said GraphQL needs to use like 32-bit integers instead of like 64. And I think that was right. So if we're basically saying like, okay, we're gonna omit the scalar type definitions, then things like this would not have been specified. I don't know if it actually applies to here or it's a separate question.
I think that would be a nice use case actually to have flexible SDL. When feeding your GraphQL implementation, you would just define your Scala as Scala int64 and just leave out the regular int.
Okay.
And then it means all your int64 are 64 bits in your implementation. So this would unlock this kind of scenarios.
Okay.
So moving forward, if you want to take a look at this pull requests, I don't know what the process is like typically for this kind of stuff. So this pull request is about adding appendix C. It's quite convenient. I mean, even for Apollo Kotlin, having this as a source of truth means that we can just copy paste it and be lenient to what the users inputs. Like if they give us directive definitions, we're going to reuse the user provided ones. But if they don't, we can like reuse the spec provided ones. So it's a nice centralized place to do this. One question on this I realized earlier today is it's adding descriptions to the type definitions. So I don't know if we want to go that deep. Still find it useful because if you look at the different implementation, like sometimes the language differs, and I don't know, if I'm implementing a new GraphQL server, it's nice that I don't have to think about what the int is. But this one is the first pull request, which I would ideally like to get merged like independently of the larger full schema effort. And then if we all agree that flexibility is more desirable, sorry about this, I can work on one and try to suggest something there.
I really like the appendix. I think that's useful independently. We have in the Relay compiler, I know we have basically an SDL of these scalar types that we use as like when we create the schema object. It's like, yeah, we always read in. And so it would be nice if we could actually just use what's in the spec.
Same for the built-in like skip and include directives as well, right?
Yep.
Yeah, all the scalars, directives, and introspection types here. There's another pull request I can show you quickly before we move to something else. If there's no other comment, is wait, which was this one? Yeah, it all started from this one. So 1036, which suggested that we added a note about introspection types. I don't want to go too deep in the diff, but this is it. So maybe what I'm going to do next after this call, unless there are other opinions, is actually change this pull request to remove language and remove some of this must and may, and just leave it open to, and add some language to say this is open to interpretation for tools.
Yeah, it might be that what we're really trying to do here is basically what you provide in the SDL is what your consumers, like you provide the information in the SDL that your consumers, your tooling consumers essentially need. And so sometimes that might be like if you're handwriting an SDL, you don't want to be handwriting all of the like underscore stuff. You don't want to be handwriting all of the scalars that you don't necessarily explicitly need. But yeah, I've even found it's useful to allow, like, sometimes I include a scalar, sometimes I don't, depending on the explicit circumstance. But yeah, no, getting that right in the spec, though, is going to be like, it's not right in the spec today, but getting it actually right, it's going to be kind of messy. So
why do you think so? I'm feeling like, sorry.
Yeah, I think that the SDL does a few things right now. It's like it's used for people to write schemas, like handwrite and do schema first development. And then it's used for tooling, for instance, for IDEs. And like the schema that you handwrite, well, your tooling might have a whole bunch of types that are generated between the handwritten schema or the like resolver first schema that is produced and the schema that you want the tooling to actually consume. Like we have a bunch of like, for each type, we add almost meta fields to them all that the server knows how to deal with, that is like special to our servers. And we wouldn't want that to be polluting the user land schema, but we do need it in our tooling. And like, we use the SDL for that. It's not like a spec compliant usage of the SDL. Should it be spec compliant? I don't know. Like, do we want to make it so that any tooling usage of the SDL is spec compliant, or is the spec SDL truly like, if you have a GraphQL ecosystem, like this is the shape that the spec must be, and then you can do whatever transforms, or this shape of the SDL, and then you can do whatever transforms you need from this guaranteed base. And those are kind of two different ways of, yeah.
But language like scalar definition must not be in SDL. Like this is the dangerous thing, because we're all using SDL in a lot of places, and someone that's new to the specification is just going to look at this, and actually this was in the issue. Like it's a real problem because it's in the spec. Yes, but turns out it's a non-spec compliant usage of SDL. So
Yeah, I think that I actually am talking through this a little. I think I would lean towards having one spec definition, which is basically like if your server gives you an SDL, like this is what the SDL will look like. This is what will be available from like basically the default SDL. Anybody can access any server that provides a mechanism of like downloading its SDL. This is the shape of that SDL. So it doesn't include the scalars, it doesn't include the built-ins, doesn't include whatever, blah, blah. And then on top of that, like the SDL provides a means of having those built-ins. Like you can use those built-ins, but that is not what the like, if you just ask a server for their SDL, you will not be getting those built-ins, or vice versa. Maybe we always give those built-ins. I don't know. But like, I think there is value in having a known shape of what to be spec compliant every SDL producer, like every GraphQL executor that produces an SDL will produce. That says nothing about what the tooling will do with that SDL and how it will transform or provide things on top or whatever. But
it means we have two flavors of SDL, right?
Yeah, it's like the syntax is valid if we include the built-ins, but that is not what the server will, or like the server will only provide built-ins if, for instance, it is not conformant, or if it doesn't include these things, or maybe we just always include the built-ins always because we really should, or some subset of built-in. I don't know.
Well, do you have some background why the scalar types must not be in SDL? Like, is there a track record of decisions there?
I think I can weigh in on some of this. Basically, when you want to build a GraphQL schema, you can't build a GraphQL schema from arbitrary SDL. For example, stuff that includes, let's say, the one-off directive or other things, if your actual implementation doesn't support that. So you can't give an SDL that has, for example, a new scalar type that GraphQL has specified, but your server doesn't support. So what you effectively need is this SDL with all of those things removed, and then you build the schema and you add the introspection and the built-in scalars and the built-in directives that you support on top of that. So that's one use case for the SDL, is building the schema. But the other case is representing what it can do. Go on.
For that first use case, your server could very well do an error if it sees something that it doesn't support. Like it doesn't support one-off and you're feeding it the one-off directive. It's an exception.
Yeah, but I mean things like if you offer the one-off field through the dunder type, then your server might not know how to actually implement that field. It might not have a, you know, a resolver effectively inside of introspection.
Then it can like fail early and just give me an error reading the SDL. I think this is where I'm going with this, is you give a lot of flexibility to the person writing the SDL manually. You relax the restriction. Like if they want to add a new scalar type, they're free to do so. But the implementation must fail if they do not support it. This is where I want to move the restriction.
The problem with that is you would be setting up a situation where you say, here is an SDL that I want you to implement. And if I've missed something out of introspection, then you must not implement that, at which point it doesn't actually conform to the GraphQL spec, perhaps, or at least not maybe to the latest version. There's a lot of that you'd be introducing a huge number of edge cases there, and making sure that the SDL that you feed into the server is something that it A, can implement, and B, is complete, is, I think, going to be quite challenging.
Just to be the devil's advocate, right? If you're feeding a hand crafted SDL, right, and you're putting like some features that your server doesn't support, that's a user error. That should be a validation error saying, hey, this is something that I don't know what to do with technically.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even moving forward, you could even do like smarter things like what we mentioned earlier. You want to support only integers on 64 bits. Well, you can do it like this, because if you omit all the scalar definitions, you're just stuck. And if you want to server to not support 32-bit ints, saying maybe in the future we want only 64 bits, and I don't want anyone to ever return 32-bit integers, then I want my implementation to not include the scalar type definition for 32-bit ints. So I'm writing some input SDL that just doesn't contain the definition.
But if your server has no usage of 32-bit int, then A, it's not in the SDL already, and B, even if we included everything that was in the SDL, that one wouldn't be included because you haven't used it. But I know that that's one of the other questions that you've got, which is about the only things that are used should be included.
So what we're saying is,
though actually what I said I think might not be completely correct, because introspection has usage of int. So I think if you were to try to not support int,
yes,
then you couldn't implement the specification, because you couldn't implement
yes,
introspection. So you
yes,
then wouldn't be GraphQL anymore.
Yes, correct. So what we're saying is we want to keep this language that scalar definition must not be in SDL.
We probably need to figure out what are the situations where that needs to be true or ought to always be true, because I do think that you're getting at something important, which is you should be able to have a SDL document that your tooling can read that does include these scalar definitions. How we get there is a little bit like, it might require redefining what we mean by your SDL, like, should not be including these built-in scalars. Like, what do we mean by your SDL or the type system definition language?
Yeah.
Like, it's the type system definition language in this scenario, as opposed to, and like, I think to make progress here, we need to know exactly what those different scenarios really are.
Yeah, I agree. We're effectively talking about a different document type here, or a subclass of documents. It's already valid to put all of this stuff into a GraphQL document, but that's not a type document. What document is it?
Any ideas on names?
I think that there should be a name for the type system defined document. It's like the executable type system document is almost, or like the resolver type system document, which is different.
Would that be the, yeah, so executable, would that be the one with the built-in definitions?
That would be the one that the spec expects right now. Like the thing that the spec right now is describing is like the resolver type system document.
All right.
That might not be a great name. That's just a.
We can iterate on naming, but maybe make a poll or something like this. Take this async. Yeah. And yeah, I think we'll have to go through that anyways. Terminology is somewhat important. Like I also had the question about type system definition language where we all use SDL. So that might also be something we want to iterate on. But again, I don't want to get too much into the big picture and really try to focus on these small things. So I work on this, make some proposal for names and terminology, and maybe we can take it from there. And if you have any,
that sounds good.
Sounds good. Yeah, any comments about Appendix C? I would love to hear them as well.
Awesome. I suspect with GraphQL Conf coming up, people might be a bit short on time for reviews like this, but hopefully we'll get some. And if you're there, we can always discuss it. Okay, let's move on to relay error handling. So Itamar.
Hi, everyone. So let me just share my screen real quick. Relay error handler. All right, the obligatory, can everyone see it? Yes, awesome. So hi, everyone, I'm Itamar. I work on infra at Meta, and I work with Ryan Holdren, and we're working with Jordan Eldridge and Tianyo Yao on the specific feature in Relay that we wanted to present the proposal for today. The reason we're presenting the proposal is so that people are aware of the direction that we're thinking of taking, can comment on it, raise any cases that they think of, and in general kind of give their opinion, but also so that people are aware. We gave a lot of thought to interoperability with other proposals. So we just wanted to make sure that people who are working on the other proposals as well know to keep us in the loop, and we'll do the same. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why we're doing this project, what the feature itself is, the interoperability considerations, and then kind of where we are in the proposal. So first of all, the current state of the world right now is that in GraphQL, when a server throws an exception, GraphQL coalesces it into a null. And the errors themselves actually do end up on the client side, but they end up in the form of metadata that isn't currently used by any client, as far as I know. And that's as opposed to like what some people think that happens is people expect it to actually throw, like a network request would. The problem with that is that it kind of creates like an ecosystem-wide trade-off where you have to decide whether you want to discard the query entirely, meaning have it like if it throws, then you just have a null and do nothing with it, and you also need to you have the problem where you can't discern whether a null is a valid null, meaning it's supposed to be null, or if it's a null that's derived from an error. So the options are basically you can opt for robustness, where you're kind of quote unquote rendering at all costs, and the null is there to do that, right? So if one field errors, then everything else still renders properly, and we just kind of return that one field as null. The problem with that is that we aren't able to delineate the nulls from the errors, and also a lot of engineers kind of forget that this is how GraphQL works. So they just kind of like handle the null type case, and forget that null type case can possibly mean that something went wrong on the server side. It's completely transparent to them. They don't realize it sometimes. And actually, from talking to engineers, to product engineers, a lot of them who find out about it then forget about it and continue to work with that. So it's actually a really big problem. The other option is correctness. So that means basically if anything in this query is erroring on the server side, throw the entire thing out. Meaning throw at the query level and nothing's rendered. Basically ensuring that you don't render incorrect information by mistake. Other significant side effects of this are also that that if you're writing after reading, you can inaccurately write nulls back to the server side. And also a big problem is that null can of course be coerced into a 0 in JavaScript, which can cause you to render wildly inaccurate information. Imagine, you're supposed to render an actual number and then you receive null and render that as a number instead. It can vary widely and be very, very destructive to any product. So in comes relay error handling. Essentially, I'm going to go through the different features. There are only about 2 features, but the illustrations hopefully will help you understand the direction. The first is that we would be switching fields from returning null to throwing by default. That would mean that it would actually throw a JavaScript exception if there is a server error. And you would still be able to opt in to the previous behavior with a directive, with an argument on a catch directive, right? So we would be providing a way to opt back into the old behavior. That's incredibly important, especially for migration. If people want to, when people move over to this behavior, they need a way to do that incrementally. So they can actually opt back into this behavior and then slowly handle all the cases appropriately to get a better rendering experience. Sorry, 1 second. I by mistake locked my screen. So down here you see 2 examples. You see an example where there's absolutely no catch, and basically if name throws, everything throws. And in the second example, you see a functional component in React. When you use a React hook with a GraphQL query, in the new behavior, essentially throwing the exception would allow you to wrap this function in an error boundary, and which I'll talk about a little bit later, and continue to render the rest of the page appropriately, but not this component. The catch directive will allow you to mark a field as catch, and that would mean that any field that throws an exception on the server side below that field, a field that has that directive, would surface the exception and would not return the data below it, and then the user can handle that data appropriately. This also gives the user the ability to tell whether an exception happened at all, or this is a null value, because if it's a null value, it can return null, right? So again, we have the fallback. I want to make sure everyone understands that catch is still in the design phase. We're still working out the details of this. This is just the direction we're going in. Here's an example of the catch directive performing a catch. So in this example, if you have catch on name, and and name errors, then you would have name, then the current behavior, the GraphQL response would have a null on name, and the metadata of errors would have the error. And what relay would provide is the breed appropriately, and then name would have an exception on it to be handled without throwing an exception itself. Here's an example where you have catch on a parent, the same exact case, name throws, right? But at this point, the only difference is the GraphQL response is exactly the same. Relay response would be that pet would have the exception on it, because that's where the catch directive is. Okay, again, opting back into null would look something like this. You just have an argument on the directive, and then it would provide the response that you receive nowadays. Some positive side effects of this are full control over the response handling. You no longer have ambiguity over what a null means. You don't have the trade-off of robustness versus correctness. You don't have to decide whether you want a null or to completely throw the entire query out. If your client supports, if you are using a collocation fragment feature, then you can really limit the blast radius. And if you use error boundaries, you can even further limit that as well. Some interoperability notes. There's a required directive in Relay. Basically, the required directive says that that if you put that directive, the null values, then the field is not null, and it'll throw an exception if it is. The decisions we came up with over there is that if required throws below a catch, the catch would handle that as if it were just a server-side exception. And a side note also is that eventually required can be replaced by CCN's exclamation mark. In terms of client-controlled nullability, I want to note that we're aware of client-controlled nullability from the beginning, and so we definitely took it into consideration while developing this proposal. When CCN is implemented, exclamation points would be the same as required inside a catch, like I just said, and the difference between catch to null and CCN question mark would be that the question mark in CCN makes fields nullable, whereas the catch null returns a null when something is thrown in on the server side. So there is a slight difference there. We definitely took that into account. Some notes on our progress so far. We've shared a post about this in the Relay repo, and I'm sharing this today with you on the GraphQL working group. Jordan also shared kind of a wider view of true nullability that this kind of fits into. We do have a straw man that's nearly ready to be published widely. We just have a couple of kind of ergonomic things to work out, including kind of what the user experience for a product engineer would be when using the response from this, which is very important. And we are implementing a prototype already. We're about 50% complete. Yeah, and we're just really excited about this. I think it'll be a really good improvement to the user experience on the Relay side. Thank you so much. I'd be happy to take any questions.
So I have some question on how I guess Alex and Anthony both have hands up, but I'll just quickly go first. So the question is related to how the engineers are going to kind of call into the getters API. Are you essentially gonna so this is more on the JavaScript side. Are you gonna represent all these generated types as a union now? So it's always a union of the real object type plus the error type. And then like when they kind of call the getter, they're forced to handle the union. Is that the value prop there?
Yeah. So we have a couple of, this introduces kind of like a couple of different options in that way for the user experience. So one option is to just have a regular union that's, type or error, right? And just have the user provide the type as generic and handle it accordingly. The other would be to provide like a discriminated union, which has like a type failure, type success, and then the value or the error itself. And that kind of like type system wise is really helpful to discriminate and further down the line not have to worry about it. The other interesting option that we have that we're kind of playing around with is introducing a class that you can access the value through a to value or provide like a default if it does throw an exception. And all kinds of, it kind of opens the world of having custom methods on it. So that's an example of something that we're still working through. We are actually working directly with the team that was originally working on Relay and consulting with them, and we have a meeting with them later today, and that's one of the things we'll be discussing. So like really good question, and yeah, that's one thing that's really top of mind for us. I don't know who was first. Alex?
Yeah, I can go. And apologies if I missed any of this. I just want to clarify what's being proposed for myself. So the catch would be a directive defined in the GraphQL schema. Is that right?
No, not in the schema. It would be defined on
sorry, in the spec. Yeah.
It's not in the GraphQL spec, no.
Oh.
Yeah, this would just be a directive that is handled by Relay and is interpreted entirely client-side. So this proposal doesn't need participation from the server. And so it would be a valid inside of Relay code for the schema that Relay presents to tooling, but would be compiled out by Relay.
Yeah, this is kind of why I prefaced this by saying that this was a Relay feature, and we're presenting this here as kind of an FYI and to get feedback and questions if there were any. But it's not like a GraphQL spec proposal.
Oh, okay, that actually clarifies I think everything for me. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Anthony?
Yeah, I guess my question is kind of related to that. First of all, I just want to say I love this idea. Some of the CCN conversations that have come up recently around the error bubbling have really, like, I think maybe inspired this or influenced this coming up. But I honestly think that we should do something that's similar to this on Apollo client as well when we implement CCN. Is there any, first of all, my question, I guess, is does this unblock Relay's use case with the Relay's concerns about the CCN proposal around both the bang and the question mark operator? And is there any possibility of this going from being a client-side directive to something that we want to, like, we intend to make a spec proposal about this in the future? Do you see any value in this being something that servers can handle and maybe even improve the performance of things further by having the server do some of this processing?
So first of all, to your point about Apollo, that's definitely like our hope. Our hope is that other clients also adopt this. We think it's a good direction. To your second question, I think Jordan, if you'd like to answer that, because you definitely thought deeply about the true nullability and the interplay with CCN. Would you like to address that?
Yeah, I think there's pretty good alignment with CCN. I outlined it a little bit in the post I made in the CCN working group about how this fits into a larger story of allowing smart clients to expose the sort of true nullability of GraphQL resolvers to the client in a way that preserves some degree of robustness. In terms of support on the server, I'm not sure. I think it makes sense to have this for smart clients. I think like the gap is like the server response models data that has errors in those locations and it's sort of an encoding trick that we keep that as metadata rather than putting those in line. And I think smart clients have the ability to do better than that and to sort of present those as inline to the user. So I would be encouraged to see if other clients could adopt it first, smart clients, and then maybe from there see if it seems like it would be useful for simpler clients to be able to adopt it via some server support.
Yeah. One thing to point out that Jordan has in his write-up is specifically when you have non-nullable fields. So Inmar didn't get deep into this, but when you have non-nullable fields, they blow up beyond the scope of just the field. And Benji pointed out, oh, Relay could just start putting question mark on all the fields. And that's true. That's exactly how, like, client control nullability gives us, we could basically, as Jordan points out in his post, that we could basically migrate towards a world where on the server, you give your true nullability, and smart clients put question marks where they don't want that non-nullable field to blow up beyond their current point, but they can still use catch to handle when there is in fact a true error. So it allows, yes, in the response format, there will be a null at this point, like this field that is never nullable will be null, but the client knows that that is in fact a caught thing and dealing with it there.
Yeah, thanks. I really love this.
Awesome, thank you. Martin?
Yes, thanks a lot for the awesome presentation. I had two questions. The first one is really quick. Can you share your slides?
Yeah, definitely. I'll share them after this call. I'll share them in the as a pull request.
Thank you. And second one was, if you have, I think you do, like you merge fragments in the Relay compiler, right? Like if two components have used two different fragments, they're going to be merged in a root query. Am I correct there?
I believe so. Jordan, can you confirm that?
Yeah, so because this is implemented entirely by Relay entirely at read time, it doesn't actually affect how the response gets sent or received from the server. It doesn't impact what we ask the server to do. It's simply a function of how we read out that particular fragment. So it's isolated per fragment. So if one fragment marks a field as catch and another doesn't, they will observe different behaviors.
Yeah.
What about required though? Like if a merged field is required in one fragment and not in the other one?
So required similarly is implemented entirely at read time. And so different fragments can have different, like, whereas CCN struggles with the lack of fragment isolation, in a required field, in a field requested by two sibling fragments must have similar CCN annotations. Relay is required is not constrained by that because it's implemented at read time. So two different fragments can read out with different semantics.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that was my second question.
Awesome. Ernie?
Yeah, kind of similar, like two questions I'd just like to clarify. Like if you go to the slide that actually shows where that like error type kind of like construct looks like. Yeah, right. So I assume that like the error that you're in that like type failure thing, like that error has the message that the server responded with, right? Like that is like it gives you that detail if you have that information, right?
Yeah. Like I said, the semantics or the ergonomics of the response are, this is just for illustration purposes. You can see,
yeah,
read isn't even wrapped in anything. It just provides the value, right? That's
right.
But in general, yeah, the error itself will be like, the user will have the ability to use whatever error was surfaced in the metadata.
Yeah, one piece of color there is that we are actually intending to add support for intentionally making some types of errors opaque, or for like sort of allow listing only certain errors. We believe that giving product engineers access to raw errors, which may be just, like error messages unintended for user consumption and which are not typed, is a recipe for danger. So we have a certain subset of errors which we know are safe, which we will allow through, but we intend to make that like user configurable.
Yeah, because that was like a thought that I had about like kind of how we end up using is like all of our errors just get like obfuscated into like an error occurred kind of situation because it's like there's too much risk of like exposing, internals or like kind of like you said, it might encourage people to like start displaying these messages which are like not translated or any of the issues that fall out of that.
Yeah.
The other question I had was the like that directive had a couple like there was like the two null option that you had on there. Like, are there any other options like you've discussed like that would support other than just like saying set this back to null at all, or is that it for so far?
That's a good question. So right now as it stands, our proposal has only two null or two result, which essentially just means catch without any argument. The reason we decided to go with that is because the queries are kind of like statically typed and just written out and that's it. You can't like pass a variable dynamically into it, into that definition itself. We decided that it would be better instead to let the user provide whatever defaults they want or anything like that at handling time instead.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it could certainly get very complicated for like defaults for like complex objects or something, right? So
the error itself, and then you can decide if you want to, what you want to do with it. Yeah. Sorry, Robert.
Hi. So I have a few questions about, I guess two questions. One is about the behavior of, let's say, multiple errors occurring in a selection set, and especially with respect to statically typing that. And also, if this is currently supported only in Relay, but we would ultimately like to support, more clients would like to support it. I want to ask about what the schema will look like in the end. So first question, like, is there a path forward for how are multiple errors in a selection set going to be handled? In that, like, are you going to have an error array at the catch boundary? Are these errors going to be associated with the field that errored out, or is it going to be just like this is a bag of errors that occurred? We don't know exactly where. Maybe you can introspect them to determine where. And likewise, like if a given field only produces an error of a single kind, like the name is too long. That's the only possible error when you select the name field. Is that type information preserved at and accessible to the reader?
Okay, so there were a couple of questions in there. First of all, yes, like if a parent catches multiple exceptions, then they'll be provided on the parent as an array of errors that can then be accessed. You can tell which field provided which error by path. So that's the answer to the first one. The second one about the schema is that, again, this is a fully client-side feature. We don't intend to propose any schema changes in this specific proposal. That's not to say that there wouldn't be future ones, but this one doesn't include any of them.
Okay, I'll clarify the second question, sorry. So if you get a single error, you'll get both the path and the error. Is that right? Of which subfield errored out? Okay. That seems like it might be difficult to work with respect to arguments passed to fields and aliases and stuff like that, for the same reason that raw response types are difficult for users to generate. But that's good to know that. Like, thank you for answering that. My question about the schema is, it seems like this is ultimately working around the fact that the type of the, let's say the name field is just string or null, or just string, depending on whether it's nullable. But really, we would like the type of the name field to be some sort of union of like error, of an error type and an OK type. So given that this is working around that, in the long term, like, does Relay want to support schemas where you get the same behavior, but the actual type of the name field is this is the union type? And I ask that because, like, if I was currently designing a schema from ground up and adopting Relay, it would be preferable to just like type all of the fields as some sort of union of OK and error types. And then it would be unfortunate if I had to type that name field as just as a string, and therefore lose the static type information about what kind of errors are allowed on that field, and for there to be no upgrade path for me in this hypothetical situation.
Rob, you're describing the desire for generic types, or at least an extra result type, which yeah, that would be
yes.
Yes. Yeah, we've had discussions about generics that goes beyond the scope of this, but yeah, it would be great if we had generics in GraphQL. And we do. The list type is a generic type.
It was nullable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like on the relay side, I mean, like, I suppose we could consider adding a generic error response as well, but I feel like having a uniform error response is probably the best place to put the line at this proposal.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. And yeah, does anyone have any other questions? Awesome. We're a little bit over time, I think, but if there are no other questions, thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing that. Excellent work. Very interesting. Okay, so we are really shy on time. We've got about 22 minutes left and 2 20-minute topics to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mention mine, and then we'll move straight on to the other one. So you may have heard this topic before. Whilst working on the incremental delivery pull requests, both Yakov and myself have found that there's this common refactoring that we want to do to the specification itself. And essentially, it means changing the core algorithm, which is execute selection set, to instead be execute grouped field sets, which is actually what we do under the hood. So effectively, the first line of execute selection set is, right, turn this selection set into a grouped field set. And then we run that. So effectively, it's defining or renaming that algorithm, removing the first line, refactoring it in the various places where it's called. And it also means that we no longer need to create this sort of virtual selection set that we used to via the merge selection sets thing. So all selection sets after this point will actually be physical selection sets that exist in the document, rather than also this virtual type that we build as a convenience. It is basically just refactoring of the algorithms in the specification. It does make the changes that we want to do for incremental delivery easier to implement. There are some interesting questions in there if you want to help with the naming of things. So, you know, if you like that problem, please get involved. But also, yeah, if you have general feedback on that, I think it would be nice. One of the things that I find quite pleasing about this is it actually simplifies down the execute query, execute mutation and execute subscription event algorithms because it pulls out more of that common logic, which is very pleasant. One thing that I'm not super keen on is that it makes whether or not we're executing it serially a argument rather than like a flowery language that we put around it. So that will be a fun one. But yeah, anyone interested in this topic, please weigh in that pull request. It is GraphQL spec pull request number 1039. Okay, that will do for me. So on to Young to talk about, oh, sorry, client controlled nullability is what we're talking about now. So on to you, Young.
Cool. Glad we talked about a lot of nullability related things today. So this is so we made about 2 months ago in the working group meeting, we talked about just stripping down the proposal down to the very basics, which is to just have the bang. And we found that the semantics of the question mark was very unclear. We talked about whether it's like errors, throwing and catching behavior, or is it changing just the nullability of the field from the client side. And we just found that over the past 2 years, that just is the issue that blocks the proposal to go forward. So we wanted to strip out the question mark from the RFC and just include the bang. And then the bang semantics will be to just change the nullability of the field from if it's null then to not null, so that the type generation on the client side can reflect that. So we want to go to the next stage, stage 3, with that kind of simplified proposal, and want to see if there are any concerns about stripping out the question mark from the proposal. And I guess from what we just talked about for relay error handling, it looks like the expectation from the relay side is that the question mark will act as a just simple null designator, which just changes the null to null at the execution time. So just kind of am curious what relay thinks about it, and what others think about not having a question mark at this stage.
Yeah, I can jump in there. I think we are very interested in the question mark in the long term, as we sort of, as I highlighted in the post that I shared. I think it does give us a path towards an actual fundamental solution to the problem that client control nullability originally sought out to solve, without like requiring client developers to sort of operate blindly by peppering the world with exclamation points where they don't actually have the knowledge of whether that field is truly null or not. So like this is like I know it's taken years, but like this is a realization I only recently had. And as came out of this discussion we had around error handling, and like if clients can actually shield the user from error nulls, then it opens up a whole different world. That said, like I would rather us like wait to do the question mark annotation than do it in like the wrong way. So I think if we could move forward with it, like you said, being like this for the purpose of execution of this selection, it simply changes this field to be treated as if it were nullable. That is like an excellent outcome for us. But if it needs to be done as a second phase, I think that's not the end of the world for us. So it's not something that we're like hard blocked on immediately.
Yeah, I think
so. Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to tack on the outcome from the error handling, basically workshopping we did, was it is the end state of client control nullability basically reflecting exactly the server semantics of what it means. So if you have a question mark, that means that this field is treated as nullable at this point, and child non-nullable fields bubble up to null there, whatever, is good. And also the flip side of if you put a bang, then it means that it is treated as like able to be bubbled, is also good, especially if we can have both a bang and a question mark on the same field. Like bang and then question mark, which like it is an error for this thing to be null, but it like to stick something in the errors array if this happens to be null, but also keep the field as actually being null in the like server response. That's like total ideal for error handling that lets us start transform. Is like one of the big problems we have is our server definitions. Like we have resolvers that in the actual PHP code, like the field, the PHP code is not nullable, but we mark it as nullable because dealing with non-nullable fields that have errors is really harsh for us. And that would like give us a migration path to having the client truly understand what the server nullability is, which is good.
I think one other piece, sorry, just to tag on the one other piece about the question mark is that there, like any client that uses a normalized store or consistency store is like sort of that normalized view of the world is actually like damaged by null bubbling, where we actually end up writing bad data into the store in a way that affects others. So the question mark would also be valuable for us from that perspective, and the ability to opt out of that null bubbling. We can still present the facade of null bubbling to the clients, to the product code, but for our ability to keep our store consistent and not like end up with artificial nulls in the response that we then have to normalize into the store would be super valuable too.
So, like I said before, I love this @catch directive that you guys are building over at Relay. But as far as the CCN proposal goes, my understanding was that the proposal to remove the question mark operator from CCN for this first phase was directly a response to the concerns about error handling here that seem to now be resolved by this @catch directive. So for the people who are working on CCN actively, does that change what direction you want to head in here? Do we want to still proceed with this simplified version that only includes the bang operator, or do you think it's now more viable to move forward with the initial proposal or the proposal a few months ago that we had, iterated on that included both operators, and then perhaps write something up that kind of, if not adding it to the spec, kind of gives a formal example of what a client side, a smart client's @catch directive could do that could utilize this and make that, some sort of, it doesn't have to necessarily be in the spec, but something that allows all of these questions and all of these issues around how do we handle the error handling with the question mark on clients. There's a solution for that. Since we have that solution, does it make sense to go back or to having the question mark, or do we feel like it's better to continue on with this incremental approach of just starting with the bang operator?
I think I'm curious to hear your thought, Alex, too, because you have probably more historical context. But I know that I think Relay's concerns will be probably now resolved, given what Jordan and Itamar said. But I do worry that there are like I think 2 or 3 kind of different semantics that we're considering for the question operator, and then I just do not want to open that conversation again. Like not to say that the end state of the CCN is without the question mark, but I don't want to kind of reopen that and maybe have another like 3 to 6 month delay into this.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, that was kind of my take too. Like Relay had concerns about the semantics, but so did a lot of other people. So like I think, I don't think the question mark is bad. I think it's fine. Like some version of it is probably great. But I think the original bang make something non-nullable is popular and easy to justify, and would be easy to merge. Like, I don't know, it's not fun to say, but it's like political, right? Like just merge the thing that's popular, and then we can talk about merging, figuring out the stuff that's less popular later.
It's almost like the
That's-
question mark needs a different champion.
Maybe.
Which is
There's one risk to merging the exclamation mark now is if we say the end goal is we want to have true nullability, the exclamation mark kind of goes against that because it's still working on the premise that all the server fields are nullable. So it means we are doing something now that we might discourage later.
That's true, and that I thought Jordan's thing was really interesting because we've been our goal with the bang operator with client controlled nullability has been to adapt to behavior that server developers are adopting because of just the semantics of GraphQL as a whole. And so that's one way to look at it. And then Jordan was talking about how the other way to look at it is maybe we can actually fix the behavior of server developers by changing the way, changing the tools that client developers have, which is interesting. And maybe maybe that's better. I don't know. I'll leave that up to folks to discuss. Maybe that's better, or maybe that the adapting to server developer behavior and then trying to get people to shift to correct behavior is like it's like a good stepping stone. I don't know, Jordan.
What I'm saying is the community has a limited attention span as well. So adding more concepts takes time. If we introduce the bang, we have to explain the bang, blog about it, and everything. And then if 6 months later we add the question mark and we say, remember the bang, then forget about it. We're changing everything again. Like this has a cost, which we might be okay with just pointing out. Like this has a cost.
That's fair. There's work there for sure.
Yeah, my sense is that they just like the question mark sort of natively arose as a foil to the bang. I think they do make sense as just primitives that make sense. And also just, like you said, the community moves slowly. Even if we do say hey, we have a picture of a better world, it's going to take people a long time to get there. And they probably need bang while they wait to get there. So yeah. I'm not too while I do think that we can get to an end state where bang is discouraged. I think I'm not opposed to it existing as a concept.
Yeah, I think the only thing I was going to say is that there is that risk of if you introduce the bang without the question mark, people won't be able to consume one without the other. In that I need to be able to control the no bubbling that happens in my application, and if I can't do that with the question mark, then I can't adequately adopt the bang potentially, right? There's that risk of I don't want to mark this field as required and have take out my entire parent tree potentially. I need to be able to locate it, which is kind of a lot of what the catch thing is doing, right? So I think that being said, I don't think it's a risk to say that we can't do this incrementally. I think it's just there should hopefully be some path forward of how do we get to the question mark in addition, right? Because I don't want it if it's a situation where we have to have somebody else who runs and is the champion of the question mark, it's well, then there's a risk of it never being done, and that creates a incomplete solution, right? But I think kind of to Jordan's point, there is that possibility of people will move slow. It sounds like it has to be okay, three months later and things like that, right? But I think it's just you just need to make sure we have some sort of how do we get forward? Because I kind of think I feel like they need to be in conjunction. You can't have one really without the other. I think they kind of play together.
I'm generally an advocate of the simple bang and question mark operators, i.e. just change the nullability. Just seems very simple and straightforward to me. That said, one of the things that Itamar raised in the presentation was effectively when you have this null bubbling, you can't do this caching anymore. It's not safe to do so. And introducing an easy way for people to cause that problem to be more of a problem more often is maybe not the best idea. Maybe we should spend a moment thinking if one of the alternatives would actually be able to introduce the behavior that we desire without also breaking our normalized caches. Robert.
I was just going to point out very quickly that, so if I understand correctly, the nullability bubbles to the nearest nullable field. And so if somebody, I think it would be very appropriate for us to roll out just half of this and then message, like the question mark operator will come later. And in the meantime, if you want to play around with this, add a magical field on every type in your server that is nullable that just refers to self. And then this like __ self field would effectively act as a catch barrier, as like a question mark barrier. But my 2 cents is that I think it's appropriate for us to roll forward with just half of the proposal, as long as we're clear on the messaging that like the other half is coming later.
And I think that another kind of wrench is the question mark takes the feature discovery, or at least that was the result of the discussion that we had before that because for the federated server to react to the question mark correctly, it needs the feature discovery from its kind of dependencies, whether they support the question mark or not, and that would add a lot more time for us to figure out. So I think that's one more argument to just go forward with the question mark as is. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just one thing I want to clarify is, in terms of the additional sort of damage done by the bang, right? It is destructive, and are we okay with encouraging that? From Relay's perspective, our plan is to implement it entirely client side, and to leave the server request as is, normalize the server response as is, and then treat it similarly to at required today, where it's actually a fragment isolated version of, we're going to pretend that fragment isolation exists, and treat it as a read time semantic, which gives the user when they're reasoning locally about one fragment, they observe the behavior of the exclamation point, but it allows us to have a scalable app where not every component has to know about every other potential sibling component.
One issue with that is if your users start copy-pasting their queries in GraphQL, they won't get the same result as what's executed by Relay. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, that's already the case with that required. With our existing fragments are not something you can view in GraphQL today.
The thing is, at required is a directive, so it feels okay to strip. Like bang feels really core to the language. So for someone that's not really in the weeds of GraphQL, might feel a bit surprising that the bang is removed.
Yeah, I don't
not actually.
The way Relay code gets written, it's not really practical to ever copy anything into GraphQL. Like you have to ask Relay, like, hey, what is the actual query you sent, right? Because it's spread across, every component has its own fragment. And so if you actually wanted to get a valid query that you could paste in, you'd have to like go to 1,000 components and copy them. So
the question then is,
I was gonna say there is the slight difference in that like GraphQL would be like, I don't know anything about this at required directive, where like with the bang it would be like, oh yeah, that's totally fine, right? Like it wouldn't immediately give you that feedback of like this isn't legit, I guess.
Yeah, that's right.
We're roughly at time, people, so if we can keep everything else short.
Yeah, that wasn't going to be short. Sorry. Question was, there's a question whether we want to add support to the servers, and if we're saying everyone is going to use the bang on sophisticated client and only client side. I mean, on Apollo Kotlin, I can see us using it 100% client side as well. So considering everything, do we still want to include the backend and the execution in the proposal?
Well, the one thing that Lee said at the original one of the early meetings is that the spec actually doesn't specify client and the server. There is one execution context. So in that sense, Relay's execution context understands bang. So I think that I don't see that problem. I mean, maybe I'm just splitting.
And our server may not. I think that may also solve the GraphQL problem, right? Like our server won't actually support bang. It'll be implemented entirely in our clients. And so if you try to paste it into GraphQL, the server will be like, what is that? I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, fair enough. That was short.
Okay, thank you, everyone. This has been an excellent discussion as always. For those of you coming to GraphQL Conf, I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks' time. Otherwise, there is still, I think, another working group next week. I'm not sure what's happening with the one after that. I assume we're cancelling it because it's during GraphQL Conf. Maybe it'll be in person. I don't actually know. Otherwise, see you next month. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Later. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.